for linguists and language policy researchers, what practical, methodological, and ethical steps must we take to ensure that our own research does not inadvertently reproduce these racist linguistic policies? Um, how can we actively dismantle these racial hierarchies rather than simply providing the expertise that sustain them?
I think that's an excellent question. It's an ongoing question. I mean, I can tell you that for me, that has meant always having a race analysis when I'm asking my questions about language policy, or I'm doing my research on language policy, or anything to do with language. Because I think one of the absences or the lacks has been the absence of a race analysis brought to bear on questions of language. Historically, linguistics has a history of being a racist field in the first place, but also in the present, this idea that we can have this objective scientific, so-called scientific inquiry into language. This has to be completely set aside. And we have to understand that because language is an embodied capacity, any discussion about language has to consider the social, the cultural, the political, which inevitably it must therefore invite our analysis to include a race and a race analysis, right? And to be attentive to the establishment and maintenance of racialized hierarchies, either not just explicitly, but also implicitly, and how language gets recruited into doing that work. So no matter what kind of work I do on language as a researcher, I must always then have that understanding in mind that, I have to be attentive to racial dynamics, racialized processes of racialization, interlocking axes with racialization, and hierarchies of race, right? I think for me, that's my biggest piece of advice. So even if you do work on language and gender, I would say you want to think of, or language, gender, and sexuality, you must think about how that interlocks with questions of racialization. It's insufficient to just say, this work is different from issues of language and race. If you are talking about language, you're already embedded in the social, the political, the cultural. You absolutely must also therefore think about how this interlocks with questions of, German, whatever. It doesn't have to be Smith, right? But the issue is the marked racialized name. These are the findings of that kind of research. And now there's more research on names and employment and returns. I think people have done this work on housing as well. So I think because people have to apply for housing, right? So this is a way in which these hierarchies, these racial orders get maintained, but also naturalized. Seen as, you couldn't get hired, so you have less, socioeconomic mobility. That's a problem of you. There's something about you that needs to be fixed as foreignness. And hence these programs, which are about, quote, washing away the foreignness, right?
Wash away is such a violent metaphor.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think that he would say openly free that for a student of him, I want to wash out of your foreigners?
I can't tell you exactly what goes on. I mean, I taught these classes. I've observed many of these classes, but who knows? But I think the most pernicious thing is when learners themselves kind of interpolate themselves into these discourses. They think, oh, this is why, for example, pronunciation classes are so popular, because they think if I can just fix my accent to be a Canadian accent or to not sound foreign, then this will change things for me, right? But understanding that linguistic practices are embodied, are varied, should be varied, and that intelligibility is actually an intersubjective kind of task. Like me understanding you speaking, however you speak, requires effort on my part. And also I become used to it. So then my mutual intelligibility increases, right? As opposed to, what? That doesn't sound like me or what I'm used to. So that's wrong.
Yes. Yes.
That's foreign. Going to draw, sorry.
Like if you ask the AI to an image of Jesus,
Oh, I see. Yes.
yes, it's going to deliver you a white Jesus. So
Because of course these are large language models and they're drawing on their training data, and that's the majority discourse and data that's out there, that Jesus is this white guy with long hair. And so exactly as you say, that's what it's going to draw for you. It's this naturalization in the present of this idea of Jesus as one way, which is that related to that naturalization of the present, for example, that Canada is a officially bilingual country, right? And these are what's out there circulating discourses. Large language models are drawing on training data that are embedded in particular kinds of discourses. And so we get white Jesus, we get English is only English and French.
any question that I didn't do that you want to answer? So please, if you want to have this final moments to.
Yeah, I wanted to tell, I know you had some questions on academic freedom. Academic freedom is also about language, right? So academic freedom is a kind of freedom that is given to researchers, professors who are, and to say, oh, you have the freedom to develop your expertise and to use your expertise to speak about your research and to do a particular kind of research in the area that you are expert in. So that's a right in Canada that is guaranteed through our collective agreements, through our memoranda of understanding that we have between the employer and us as the researcher faculty members. Great. Now, the question becomes, though, how do we enact this freedom? And how do we maintain this freedom? But how do we also prevent this freedom from being abused, right? So taken away or used to do things that are harmful. And what we see is often that academic freedom, is a kind of discursive freedom, right? I have the right to talk about my research. I have the right to make statements about what I believe to be true based on my expertise. And so the kinds of, we're seeing two different kinds of attacks on academic freedom. One is this freedom, the kind of invocation of academic freedom by particular kinds of researchers to comment on things outside their expertise. So, for example, we have particular kinds of researchers who will say things about that are misogynist, but they are not professors of women and gender studies, for example. We will see professors, let's say, of psychology, say things about the use of pronouns and very transphobic things about the use of pronouns. But these, if you look at this person's research expertise, these issues are not part of their research expertise. All of a sudden, they've decided, because I'm a professor, I can speak about anything freely. This is not the exercise of academic freedom. This is an irresponsible mobilization of your academic freedom in your field of expertise to say anything you want. And in fact, we have researchers such as of academic freedom, such as Joan Scott, Robert E. Post, who argue that academic freedom is a freedom only within your realm of expertise. This is an expert freedom. This is not the freedom. It's not free speech. I can just say whatever I want, right? And so that's one direction from which there's an attack on academic freedom, which is people doing, for example, residential school denialism and saying, well, I'm a professor, so I can say that. When we know the research is very clear, first of all, we should listen to the very communities that have told us that residential schools exist and the survivors. But then even researchers who concur and be like, yeah, we did the research and we also agree, or we support these experiences and these findings. So that's one direction. And the other one is when experts want to speak about their area of expertise, such as settler colonialism, is genocide and exists in other parts of the world. And then this speech, it is expert speech because people are speaking from their area of expertise. This is shut down, or people are punished for speaking in this way. And so that is the kind of confounding, question of academic freedom as the right to speak from your place of expertise, right? But being shut down, or you're overreaching. But in all these examples, speech, right? Use of language is so speech. When I say speech, I mean you can also write about these things, right? Is the place of harm, and is the place which is regulated either causing harm or allowing for more harm to happen. And sometimes those regulations are direct or indirect, right? So I want to, say that, thinking about academic freedom, as a kind of freedom to speak, but also to ensure that there's freedom from the proliferation of racial discrimination and harms is the kind of interesting context and very productive for a researcher like me on academic freedom in which to investigate this kind of relationship between language, speech, and harm.
Yeah. So thank you